Hey guys, Metal Jesus here. Lately I've been doing a lot of these game collection videos and they have been very popular. You guys seem to be enjoying those. And I wanted to do another one, but I was really kind of curious which one I should tackle next. So I reached out to my Patreon, did a poll, and you guys overwhelmingly decided that I should probably show all of the original NES games that I have in my collection. It's a video I haven't done before, which is kind of surprising. And I have to be honest, this is one of the more curious, more weird and cool collections in my game room. You're gonna see that because it covers all sorts of stuff, from home brews to hacks, to obviously retail release games, and even Famicom Japanese games. But we're going to start this video with a couple recent collector's editions. You see Metal Storm Collector's Edition here. This is an amazing release that was put out by Retrobit. They did this probably like about a year or so ago. I actually got my copy from Castlemania Games. Now, Metal Storm is one of the more originally expensive games to have in the collection, and this was really cool to see them doing an officially licensed version of it. A special collector's edition comes with a colored cartridge. There's actually multiple different colored cartridge versions here. A metal pin, you have that awesome action figure there, as well as a full color manual. You also have a reversible poster, and honestly, the game is just so good. And so this is the one version of the game that I have, and I was so happy that they did this because the original can be pretty pricey at this point. Another collector's edition that they did is for Holy Diver! Yes, you have to do it in the voice of Ronnie James Dio. This is another really awesome release. And I love how this is an officially licensed game that originally only came out in Japan. And so if you wanted the NES, North American version, this is what you got here. And they actually sold these fairly reasonably priced. I think this was $60 for the collector's edition. And as you see here, it's a certificate of authenticity. You get a pin, you get a bunch of stickers and stuff like that. So yeah, another very cool part of my NES collection. And one of the really fun parts about collecting for the NES is all of the fan support, all of the ports, the ROM hacks, the fan patches, things like that got physical releases. So you see a bunch of them here. And so it's really cool to get these versions that will play on a real North American Nintendo Entertainment System. So you see one of them here. This is the Tower of Radia. This was originally a Japanese only Famicom release. But then what they did is they put a fan translation patch, so this game plays in full English, and they put it on this NES style cartridge, which again is really cool. Here is Castlevania Chorus of Mysteries. So again, this is a fan-made ROM hack of the original Castlevania, but it's a completely brand new story. So I thought that's pretty cool. And speaking of ROM hacks, about 5 years ago, seems like there was a lot of ROM hacks dedicated towards retro YouTubers. You see 3 of them here. Of course, the first one is our good buddy Radical Reggie in his own game, as well as Barnacles. And on the end there, well, yeah, I even got my own ROM hack NES game, the Metal Jesus World Tour. So this is a ROM hack of a Japanese shooter, but with a completely new title screen, new graphics in the game, all kind of music and metal based. I thought this was very, very cool. Look at this cartridge. This thing is just so beautiful. So Sweet Home, again, was another game that was only released in Japan, but got a fan translation. And then our buddy, the Wizard, Jared the Wizard over on Instagram made this one. And I love the blood splatter on that cartridge. It's beautiful. And then here's another one. I think this is probably my all-time favorite NES cartridge right here. At least as far as the design, it's obvious why I like it. It's the new Ghostbusters 2. This was also made by my buddy over on Instagram, Jared the Wizard. And again, he filled the cartridge there with slime, and it looks so cool, doesn't it? Plus, this is the version of Ghostbusters that we never got over here, but they got it over in Japan, so he made this physical version of it, which again is super cool to have in the collection. But beyond fans taking Japanese games and bringing them over here, there are a lot of NES homebrews, original games made to play on the NES, and often they were released in physical form. You see 8 of them here. And again, it's just something that I feel is very unique to the NES. I think it's because almost anybody can kind of get involved in this. And there were a lot of people that were able to put out the physical versions of it, and some of them are very good. You see a lot of them from Mega Cat Studios there. So yeah, it's another kind of bonus for collecting on the NES. I especially like how some publishers went all out and even did colored cartridges. You know, I think it's pretty cool, kind of interesting, makes those games really stand out and feel kind of special, you know? Even my buddy, the immortal John Hancock, got in on this, creating specific releases for the expo that he used to run in his hometown. So every year, John Hancock would do the Cowlitz Gamers for Kids Expo and have a specific release there that you could only get if you actually attended it. So I thought that's really neat. This is a very cool release by Sergio Elizondo. So he is a musician, plays guitar, composes music, and he released his entire album on the NES. And this is kind of mind-blowing because it's actually digital audio, but it plays on a real console. So it's something you could probably only do in today, you know, with the printed circuit boards and all the stuff that they would need to put on the inside of the cartridge. But man, that's a really special release there. But now let's go ahead and take a look at the retail releases that I have in my collection, and you're going to see something very curious here. So this is obviously Dragon Warrior 1 through 4, but with different size boxes. So the ones on the right there, those are the original retail releases, and the ones on the left actually they're from an Etsy store. So the vast majority of my NES collection is loose cartridges that I picked up at garage sales years and years ago. I don't have a ton of complete in-box games, but recently I discovered the website miniboxgaming.com, and essentially what they do is they do perfect cartridge-sized mini boxes for people like me who have mostly loose cartridges. So these are a game changer for the way that my games look in the game room. I absolutely love those things, and you're going to see that throughout this video, that most of them are actually going to be these little mini boxes. And so this is a look at my RPGs on the system, and I have really fond memories playing the original Final Fantasy on it, as well as the 2 Ultima games. Now, I originally played Ultima 4 on the Commodore 64, and yeah, that's a great version of it, but I also really appreciated sort of the quality of life changes that they made to the game when they brought it over to the NES. Now, obviously the game is very simplistic by today's standards, but man, I loved it on that system. And during this era, you just got a ton of arcade ports to the NES. Now, we had them on the Atari and some other systems that came previously, but it was the NES that started to really be able to replicate those, especially better than, you know, something you might get on the Atari for sure. And so a lot of these actually, you know, even though they're not 100% pixel perfect recreations of the arcade versions, at the time, they were pretty neat, and I think they still hold up today. Speaking of which, one of my favorite ways to play Arkanoid on any system is with this special controller that was released for it. You know, that dial up there, that analog feel, man, it just changes this game completely. It is the way it's meant to be played. This is a fantastic port of that game. Some more random games that I wasn't quite sure how I was going to organize them, but one of my favorites on the system is Shatterhand. For a long time, that was considered a total hidden gem, and for very good reason. It's a great 2D platforming game, beat 'em up game, very smartly designed. It's almost a little bit ahead of its time compared to a lot of other simpler games. Just a fantastic game. And then you'll notice that I don't really own very many Mega Man games, and that's because when I started diving deep into collecting for the NES, those were some of the more expensive games to get. And so I never really ran into them at a very reasonable price, but I do have probably one of the best ones, which of course is Mega Man 2. These I'm lumping together as vehicle-based games. Now, they're not all racing games per se. Obviously, City Connection there is not a racing game really at all. Most of them kind of are, but just another batch of awesome games on the system. I've mentioned many times Rad Racer before. Also, Excite Bike is one of my favorite Nintendo games ever. Also, Cobra Triangle is a great game. Doesn't get enough love. Breakthrough, fantastic arcade game, and the NES port is pretty good. During this generation, you just had a ton of licensed games. You had licensed games for comics, for movies, for television shows. It just goes on and on and on. And, you know, looking back, not all of them are the best. There definitely are some standouts here, but yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of fun to collect for. I think it's a really neat like moment in time when that was just all the rage, right? You could have a licensed game and then immediately have an audience built in for it. And it probably wasn't until you got it home when you released, it may not be very good, but it did probably sell titles. Here is Vice Project Doom, and it's kind of funny because I think it has one of the worst covers ever. Just look at her face. It just does not look great at all. You know, it looks like you paid your brother's uncle like $50 because he kind of knows how to draw. But the irony is this is a really fun game. This is actually one of the, well, it's hard to say if it's one of the more fun games, but I think it's, again, definitely a hidden gem on there. People obviously kind of know about it today, but 10 years ago, 20 years ago, most people didn't know about this game. And so I'm very glad that I got it early. This was the era of arcade shoot 'em ups, and I played so many of these back in the day. You know, I think like many of you, some of my earliest NES memories were renting the console and a stack of games from a local video store. That's where I went. So basically there'd be a wall of VHS and beta movies, but then you'd also have a wall of games. And back in the day, you know, on a Friday, you'd go rent it and then you'd bring it back Sunday night or Monday morning, something like that. So I remember renting, oh man, Tiger Heli, Sky Shark, Section Z. It was just so many great shooters on that system, and they're still fun to play today. Here's a couple Konami games, and the reason why I lined them up like this is because it showed some of the consistency they had with their box design, which I really like actually, especially looking back. I like how you have the first three Castlevania games there. Then of course you have the Contra Super C, but I do like the fact that back then some publishers would have consistency in how their box looked. So it made them really stand out, especially if you liked one title. It was easy to go and say, hey, they made that game, so I'm going to check out this one over here. And Nintendo did that very well early on with their black box series. You see a bunch of them here. Again, you're very quickly able to see, oh, okay, they made Mario Brothers, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up Kung Fu or Mach Rider or, you know, Choo Choo Land, something like that. So I don't have a bunch of them. I think they released 30 of them in total, but this is the 6 that I have. And of course, being a Nintendo console, first party releases on it were absolutely excellent. You see a bunch of them here. Obviously, Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. One of my favorite Mario games of all time, Super Mario Brothers 3. That is a masterpiece, by far one of my favorites. This is probably some of the most sports games I have on any system. I think so. And it's a variety here. I mean, I've got boxing, I've got track and field, I've got football, hockey, skateboarding, snowboarding, baseball. It's just, yeah, it's a lot of different sports games. I'm not a big fan of sports games, as you guys know, but I do like the arcadey feel of a lot of these. You can just kind of get in there and have fun. You don't have to get way down on all the details. It can be a lot of fun. I've mentioned it before, but one of my favorite things to do is play old game shows on old consoles. So for instance, you see Super Jeopardy there. You also see MTV's Remote Control. So one of the really fun things to do is play these old game shows today, because it's so locked in time. It's so wild to play some of these things where they're talking about politicians at the moment, or things that happened in pop culture that you completely forgot about that was seemingly really important back in the day. Plus also being someone who's a little bit older, I feel like I've got a little bit of an advantage here, especially when they talk about like music released at the time. Again, it was new when the game was made, but to play it today is hilarious. I usually destroy. I've mentioned a few times cover art, and one of my favorite things about collecting games for old systems is the cover art. I know it's silly, but I think it goes back to my history of just growing up with the Atari 2600, which had amazing cover art, and they continued that on the NES. And so you see 6 games here that I think just look amazing in their cover art. It seems like in the last 5 years or so, a lot of NES collectors have started to pay attention and start collecting Japanese Famicom games. And I am certainly one of those people. If I run into a collection, I probably will take a chance on it because, one, the games are often cheaper than the North American NES versions. Also, they got games that we didn't get. And I love how colorful and interesting they look, especially compared to the stock retail NES versions that we got here, where ours are mostly just gray, right? Not very exciting. But over there, their cartridges are colorful. Sometimes they're translucent. Yeah, it's really fun to collect for. And so I have over 20 Famicom games at this point, but what's really handy is that if you get one of these clone systems, they almost always have 2 slots, one for NES and one for Famicom. So if you get into this type of collecting and you want to play something new, something different, you can almost always play these on those clone systems, again, which is very handy. So anyways, guys, that is a quick look at my NES collection, something I probably should have done years ago. But honestly, I kind of stopped collecting for it years ago. It's one of those things where it started to get extremely expensive, and it just wasn't as fun to collect for when every game seemed to be costing an arm and a leg. You know, that's kind of why I sort of moved over to Famicom, because it's like, oh, you can still get games for $1 or $2, which is really fun. But that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement in my collection. As you guys have seen here, I don't have every game for it by a long shot. Thankfully, I do have an EverDrive, which kind of opens up the possibilities for me. So I do use an EverDrive often. But you know me, I do definitely prefer the original physical cartridges. I just love that tactile feel. I like the feel of putting the real game in the system with a real controller. That's how I roll. And also a huge thanks to my Patreon, who helped me come up with this video and also helped me decide the next one, which will probably be my PlayStation 1 game collection. But I would love to know what you think about my NES collection. As you can see, it is all over the map. Again, it's mostly built on me just finding this stuff at garage sales years ago. So it's very hit and miss. But if there are some games in here that you think I should absolutely have in my collection, please let me know down in the comments below. And as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.